you're currently joining us on, you'll see a Q&A feature that you can ask questions and it'll pop up for us. There is also a chat feature, so you can use either one of those and ask questions, and we'll get to those as quick as we can. And if it's a question that's kind of pertinent to the topic, we'll kind of go ahead and stop and address that question. And if it doesn't really fit in, we may address it towards the end. At the conclusion of this webinar, we will send out probably tomorrow. It normally takes a few hours for the webinar to process before it gets completely uploaded to YouTube. So sometime tomorrow, you'll receive a recording of this in case you want to go back and rewatch it. You'll also receive a copy of the PowerPoint. So there's a few things in here that you may want to reference back, and that will be there as well as a quick surveys. We kind of continually build these webinars and build our workshops and mentor hunts and everything. All the information we get, we can use to really help bolster our efforts and provide more opportunities for you guys. So again, just kind of a quick outline on what tonight's discussions is going to look like. We want to talk a little bit about the kind of management and the conservation aspect of fur-bearer hunting and trapping. Obviously, the way society has shifted in the last couple of decades, there's been a lot of efforts to limit the participation or limit the ability for people to practice fur-bear hunting or trapping. And so we're going to dive just very quickly and touch on that, and then we'll go in through a little bit of management, and then we're really going to dive into some regulations, land access, and then finish out with some hunting strategies that you can kind of immediately implement if you were to go out and give this a try. And then we should have a few minutes at the end for a question and answer, so we'll stick around for a little bit. If you guys have any other questions that may be completely off topic to this webinar, we can certainly answer those at that time. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started right away. We always like to start off with kind of this historic view of what Illinois historically looked like, because it's very important for us as hunters and as conservationists to understand these landscape level changes and the impacts that they have on a lot of our wildlife populations as well as habitat. And so you can see, obviously, Illinois is known as the prairie state. So historically, throughout the 1800s, you can see on this map, it was this beautiful mosaic of just wet prairie lands, wetlands, kind of, mosaic and intersecting strips of timber throughout that kind of naturally follow those riparian corridors around the rivers. And you can see, obviously, we have seen a drastic shift as populations continued to grow, human population almost exponentially at some point. We had to grow more food. And so Illinois was largely converted to a lot of these wet prairies were drained, and the soil was converted into ag. And so now you can see we are pretty much an ag dominated state. The pink is kind of those more urban centered areas. But a lot of the species that we're going to discuss tonight really can thrive in habitats like this. And there's a few species that we'll kind of touch on that are probably at their, Curtis, correct me if I'm wrong, but at their highest population level that they may have ever been at.
Yeah, so generally we talk about these maps as a bad thing. And I mean, in general, yeah, most of us do believe it's probably a bad thing that we lost a lot of our excellent wildlife habitat, but a few species have been able to take advantage of that. And what Dan's talking about is species like raccoons and coyotes are probably more plentiful today than they were prior to European settlement or at any time in our history. And part of that reason is the increase in agriculture, which increases the prey base, whether that's mice and shrews and other microteens or rabbits and things of that nature, on up to deer. But then what goes along with that at this same time, we kind of call it the era of extermination, because at this time, when they were settling North America, basically, if it was scary, you just kill it. If it could kill your chickens, you just kill it. You don't ask questions. You just do that. It was a hard time for people to survive. And there's kind of an old saying that you can't talk about conservation to a hungry person. And that was certainly the case in North America at this time. And it wasn't until, around 1900 when folks started caring about that. But one thing that happened in this era of extermination and everything that's scary got killed is basically all the larger predators who kept the what we call the mesocarnivores in check. And that could be coyotes, raccoons, skunks, opossums, you name it. They kind of got wiped off the landscape. They got pushed back further and further. And then as the forest got chopped down, a lot of the habitat that used to support those large predators just kind of got fragmented and no longer suitable. So what was probably all around a bad thing for wildlife and for habitat in North America wound up being good for a few species, and that can wind up leading to some opportunities for us, the hunters and trappers, because we got a lot of critters out there and not a whole lot of people going after it. So this is kind of the exact opposite case of deer. So many people going after deer. There's a good amount of deer out there, but it seems like every piece of property you go to's got several hunters. When it comes to fur bearers, you could feel downright lonely out there, and most of us aren't going to complain about that.
Not at all. And I kind of want to continue along the same conversation, Curtis. But wasn't there, even at that point, there was some kind of state-sponsored bounties that targeted some of these, mesopredators, where the state said, "Yeah, we really need to reduce these populations," and they were awarding money to individuals who were harvesting those animals.
Yeah, there was, even bounty program. I think the bounty on gray wolves in some states even, lasted into the 60s or 70s, so well after a lot of the conservation movements that we're going to talk about here in a second. Um, but yeah, and that's the big bad wolf. Think back to every nursery rhyme you've heard. Like, people are afraid of big scary animals, and bottom line is they're competition. We're predators, they're predators, and predators who compete over the same prey base, they tend to not get along. So we like to think of us as humans being up on a soapbox, being so far much better than all the other critters, but in reality, we're just a predator competing over the same prey base, and we act in much the same ways as the other predators do.
Well said. And so now we're going to kind of transition, as we were talking throughout the 1800s, early 1900s. Now we're kind of moving into this, what a lot of people call the conservation era. And this is when a lot of influential hunters and sportsmen and sportswomen really started to notice that, hey, we are starting to lose these wild populations. And if we don't care for them, who will? And so there was a lot of efforts at that point to really bolster conservation efforts. And one of the, I think, arguably the most fundamental and probably the most celebrated success story of kind of modern conservation is this Pittman-Robertson Act, which is also known as the Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Act. And I do want to highlight it because I think this is really important. And I think socially, there's a lot of people who don't understand how important the sale of firearms and ammunition is to conservation efforts. But essentially, every time a hunter or a target shooter, or even somebody who just wants to buy a self-defense firearm for their home, every time they purchase a firearm, there is an excise tax that's already built into the price of that product. So it's not an additional, tax that's run up at the point of sale. It's already built in kind of tax at that quote unquote manufacturer's level. Obviously, they're passing that along to the consumer per usual, but it is already kind of built into that price that you're purchasing. And the really, really, really cool thing about these funds is they cannot be used by the general treasurer. They cannot just be absorbed into the general allocation funds. They are given to the Secretary of Interior to award to states, and they have very specific uses for that money. And essentially, just kind of for clarity, it's basically to improve public lands, as well as provide more hunting and shooting opportunities. So they can purchase land with it. They can do wildlife research with it. They can do outreach and education. The Learn to Hunt program is actually funded by this act. So as we recruit new hunters and they go out and purchase firearms and ammunition, that's again bolstering more conservation. And so that's just kind of a really important piece of the puzzle that we really like to highlight, is this economic impact of hunters. And one thing I'll kind of lead Curtis into this, but we talked a lot about, kind of in the last slide, about some of these essentially wildlife populations that were hunted to basically extinction or extirpation from that native range. Now, where we get into interesting things is regulated hunting. So if you want to talk kind of about those two differences a little bit, Curtis, and kind of fill in those gaps for us.
Yeah, and this is an important distinction, because if you've ever, maybe online you've seen somebody who might be anti-hunting who references like the passenger pigeon as a reason why we shouldn't hunt today. And really that's like comparing apples and oranges, because the passenger pigeon unfortunately happened in this age of extermination, along with the gray duck and the heath hen and a handful of other species that we lost forever. But that was a completely different animal than what's practiced today. Today we have regulated hunting and trapping, and we have the Illinois DNR who acts as the wildlife managers of the state. We also have federal, wildlife programs that work in the state, wildlife managers that research and get the best science available on wildlife so that we can set limits, quotas, method restrictions, whatever is needed to ensure that healthy populations are sustained. So, the way that it functions today, regulated hunting and trapping have never led to a species to become endangered or extinct. And that's a really important thing to point out. What happened to the passenger pigeons, that was bad, but that wasn't hunting like it was today. That was killing. That was market shooting. That was every landowner, just partaking because they didn't think that they would ever run out, or they didn't care if they did.
Yeah,
And
I mean, when you read, historical journals from that time, there's stories that talk about these flocks of passenger pigeons that are just miles and miles in length and width, and so it's just amazing that unregulated hunting can really have a profound impact, but regulated hunting never.
sure, yeah, and it was the pigeons and the bison probably more than anything that drew the nation's attention to conservation. So, in some ways, I'm sure the passenger pigeon didn't want to be a martyr, but if it was going to go out, at least it kind of changed the way the country did things. And since then, it's been a resounding success. We've had some awesome success stories right here in North America in present day time. I know if you watch the Discovery Channel, you'll hear a lot of doom and gloom about species going extinct and rainforests being cut down, and not to say that all that's not legitimate concerns, but we also need to sing the praises of the success stories. And here, where we have basically a self-funded system that can't get cut because hunters fund the conservation program, like yeah, deer, Canada geese, black bears, elk. I mean, it goes on, and not just game species. We've got birds of prey like peregrine falcons and bald eagles that have made awesome recoveries, and all of this has been funded by hunters, either directly or indirectly. So awesome system. Other Australia, for the most part, has copied our wildlife management program from North America pretty much to a T, because they saw how successful it's been here, and it's been really successful there too. So yeah, it's good news, good stuff out there. It's not all doom and gloom like on Discovery Channel. They're just trying to get people to buy the DVD. Do people still buy DVDs?
I don't
Probably
know.
not. It's all
I don't
downloadable.
even have a DVD player.
I know, yeah. Nobody does anymore. You
Yeah.
can maybe.
No, but I mean, it's real interesting. Even if you just think back, 70 years in the 1950s, it made the newspaper if they saw a deer or a turkey in that county. And now it's to the point, if I drive to work, that's, 2.5 miles down the road, if I'm at the right time of day, I'm going to see deer. It's just really profound to see that impact in such a little amount of time. And again, it's all thanks to these conservation dollars, by purchasing firearms, by purchasing ammunition, by buying hunting licenses, and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, my grandpa used to tell me, they'd get a deer tag back when you first could get them, and they just hoped to find a deer track in the season. They didn't even have aspirations of filling the tag. It was the talk of the town if you found a track. And nowadays, if you look at the bow hunters forum on Facebook, people are complaining, I only saw 12 deer today. Bah. I'm gonna go drink my monster and eat some pizza. Anyway, moving on.
Moving on. So, Curtis, tell us what Furbearer means. What is this term that we're going to kind of use throughout this presentation tonight?
Yeah, so people ask all the time, well, all mammals have fur, right? So aren't they all fur bearers? Well, technically, but so this is a management term. Fur bearer is a management term like the term big game or upland game. And this refers to a suite of critters of mammals, small to mid-sized critters that have historically been harvested primarily for their fur. That doesn't mean that's the only reason why they were taken, but that was the primary reason they were targeted. Makes up the Furbearers, really diverse group. I mean, we're talking some cool critters in here. Largest rodent in North America, the beaver, second only to the capybara from South America. We've also got the smallest vertebrate carnivore in the whole world, the least weasel, which tiny little guys will tackle rabbits, which would be the equivalent of you tackling a grizzly bear and killing it with your teeth. So that's pretty
Gosh.
impressive. Pound for pound, they're some of the greatest hunters out there. And then, of course, our only marsupial, the little possum. I know they get a bad rap because they're not the prettiest critters out there, and they don't smell particularly good. I know this, but they're really cool, and it's our
And
only
they
marsupial.
provide a very good ecological service too, with how much they eat. They eat a ton of ticks, so they're really good at kind of reducing that tick population, which is important because gosh, ticks are the worst.
It's a neat animal. Their body actually runs a little bit too low to properly harbor rabies. So it's one mammal who has natural resistance to rabies, which is pretty cool. So a neat little critter, and they have a prehensile tail.
Yeah.
13 mammae. That's not even an even number. How does that happen? I don't know. What's not to love about the possum? Really cool critters. But since this group is really diverse, the management of fur bears is very diverse as well. And that brings it, this is like basically wildlife management 101, but it's really on display when it comes to fur bears because basically that diversity that I mentioned, we've got species in here like muskrats who can have 3 to 4 litters per year. There might be 6 to 11 muskrats in that litter, and the young might start breeding at 6 months. So basically, they've done studies on muskrat populations that humans can reduce the muskrat population by 80% and see absolutely no effect whatsoever the next year. So it's really hard
Sounds
for,
like wild pigs.
yeah, they're in the mouse family, Crucidae. So they're the prototypical R strategist, which we have written in there. Some of you might be remembering that from high school or college, biology or any wildlife classes you may have taken. But we have R strategist and K strategist. Humans are the prototypical K strategist. We don't have a lot of offspring. We live a long time. Mice are the prototypical R strategist. They have a ton of offspring. They don't live very long. And of course, muskrats, raccoons, things like that are really on that R side of the spectrum. Then we have bobcats, much lower reproductive rate. They actually monitor using placental scars on collected uterine samples from female cats, the reproductive rates from cats in Illinois and across the country. And it's always somewhere between like 2 and 4 per year. So as far as fur bears go, now for people, that would be a heck of a lot. If your brother has 2 to 4 kids per year, you're going to get tired of buying Christmas presents pretty quick, I'll tell you that. But for a critter, for a wild animal, that's not that many. So that's what bobcats typically have. And since they have a lower reproductive rate, they are susceptible to over harvest. So they're a different management strategy. They actually set a harvest quota and then allocate tags using historical effort and success rate data to basically hit that quota exactly without going over. So it's a really great way to ensure that people do have opportunity where opportunity exists, but population stays healthy, robust, and in a lot of cases continues to grow. A lot of the metrics that they monitor, it shows that the bobcat population is at least steady, if not still increasing in Illinois. So pretty cool. It's a cool critter. Badger and otter are the two that are in between. So they're kind of in between the big time R strategist like muskrat and the bobcat, which is still really a bit of an R strategist. They're not quite a K strategist, but much less so than a muskrat. So those two critters have a yearly bag limit. So you can get 5 otter in Illinois for the year. That's it. And for badger, it's a split zone. It's got a north and a south zone. One in the south, two in the north there. But Different management strategies for different critters, and this little graphic over here to the right is a cool little representation of just kind of how these R strategies go and how hunting plays in there. Basically, all of those mortality factors on the right hand side of that slope, they're compensatory. So if you take one away, the others make up for it, right? So let's just say somebody said, "Hey, if we just quit hunting deer or raccoons, there would be none more would die." No, it would probably be the exact same amount would die. It would just be more would die of competition, of
Vehicle collisions.
yeah, of disease, of starvation in the winter when resources get low, of something. So um, basically hunting is this is why it's so awesome. It utilizes this harvestable surplus and generates a self-funding monetary mechanism to keep it going, which is just it's cool. If all of our systems in America worked that good, I think we'd be doing all right, Dan.
I think so.
And then the
Oh,
last little
sorry.
point there, just coyotes are kind of it's year-round open season. Landowners in almost all states, year-round open season. One of the most highly persecuted animals on the face of North America, at least. Every deer hunter, of course, doesn't like them. The bird hunters don't like them. And despite that, what we said earlier, coyotes may be doing better now than at any time in history. So got to give them respect for being a really I mean, they're a tough competitor. When you go out, if you trap or hunt successfully a coyote, you've done something. I mean, that's you've fooled an animal that has probably been tried to be fooled multiple times before. So no easy feat. Yeah, and so the goals of management, we kind of talked about the diverse strategies, but when it comes to fur bears, some of these critters actually do can cause damage. Some of them are just maybe a nuisance, like coyotes, where the landowners don't want them around their livestock. They could actually be livestock issues, but then there's other critters like beaver, raccoon, that woodchuck that are like notorious, some of the biggest nuisance issue critters in the state. So um, one of the goals is just to mitigate those human wildlife interactions and also to give people a way means to deal with them. Also to manage disease risks, because just the more dense a population is, the easier it is for a disease like canine distemper to run through. This is a big thing with raccoons. You see, basically, historically, when the fur market was strong and a lot of people were hunting and trapping, disease prevalence was lower than it is when the fur market is low and there aren't a lot of people out there because the population is just so dense, and especially with raccoons who sort of sleep communally, diseases pass from individual to individual pretty dang quick. And then as a bonus, we get to monitor these species that are there would be no other way to monitor it. Uh, when we talk about different animals, all animals have a different detection rate, and so deer really high detection rate. If you have deer on your farm and you spend a few days on your farm, you're probably going to see those deer. But when it comes to animals like bobcat, coyote, fox, these animals are all nocturnal. They're super secretive. You may be on that farm for 5 years, 10 years, and not see those critters, but they're there. So detection rate for fur bears really low. And the nice thing that about trapping and hunting, it gives the IDNR access to carcasses, also gives them access in some instances to live critters. When it comes to people trapping with foothold traps, I know Wisconsin, where I came from, you have to have a bobcat tag to keep a bobcat. So if somebody was coyote trapping and a bobcat got in their coyote trap, they would call the Wisconsin DNR in Wisconsin and they would come out and put a collar on it. And they actually collared, I'm sure it's more than this now, but while I was there, it was over 110 bobcats.
That's a lot of data.
That's a sample size. That's amazing. Try to find a sample size of over 50 bobcats anywhere.
Yeah.
It's hard to find. And they got that all basically for free working with trappers. And I also should add that all these cats caught in footholds and then done a complete biological workup, not a single capture related mortality, which is amazing and really speaks of the humaneness of present day traps.
Which we'll spend a lot of time on as we kind of go through this presentation. We have a few slides on just that topic. But thanks, Curtis. And now we're going to kind of quickly move through the regulations. Again, we kind of mentioned this is a fairly abridged version of the regulations. We could spend, a couple hours talking through the regulations. So we'll just go through some of the more pertinent ones. And I picked out a few that, for me, a lot of the reason I like to fur bear hunt is because you get to do a lot of cool things. You get to hunt when most other people aren't hunting. You can hunt at night. You get to use, cool gadgets like bright flashlights and electronic collars. And so there's just a lot of different nuances compared to deer or turkey or waterfowl hunting. And so we'll just kind of go through some of the bigger differences there. But what we are going to be referencing is this Illinois Digest of Hunting and Trapping Regulations. You can find it on their website. I recommend downloading it onto your phone. Another good resource is this new site that they launched, I believe it was last year now, called huntillinois.org. It's got some really good tools that can help you filter out locations where you can actually hunt some of these species, because that's one of the biggest, I would say, issues. I'll kind of get back to it in a second. I'm just skipping around. Oh, it's way back here. Anyway, there are some very specific site regulations, and I know Curtis has as well, have run into many instances where, that place is loaded with coyotes. I hear them every night. I'm out there deer hunting. They may not allow you to coyote hunt at that particular site. So make sure you're always reviewing these site specific regulations. They'll tell you what species you can hunt there, where you can hunt those species, when you can do it, how you can do it, and most importantly, especially for fur bear hunting like coyote, what firearms you can use. Now, me personally, I don't like to necessarily use a shotgun. Is certainly my least ideal method of take or chosen method of take for, let's say, coyote hunting, for instance. But many of the sites you come across, a lot of the sites where I hunt here in East Central Illinois, do not allow rifles to be used at all. A few of them will allow you to coyote hunt in the evening with a 22 or other rimfire. So just, again, make sure to check these site-specific regulations, because every little site may have some very nuanced differences. And again, a lot of it is due to different user groups that are out there. One of the big sites that Curtis and I were actually just at a few days ago doing some coyote calling, they get a lot of horse traffic. It's a big equestrian park. And so it kind of makes sense in that instance that they don't want a bunch of people out there shooting rifles. So again, there are all these different, user groups that these regulations have to navigate and pay attention to. So just kind of make sure to take those site-specific regulations and follow them as best you can, or to a T, I guess I should say. Another big one that you may run across, we have started to see it in our area. You're starting to see a shift where a lot of sites are starting to require the use of non-toxic shot. Obviously, lead ammunition has some inherent disadvantages in terms of toxicity and potential lead poisoning, and so we're seeing a lot of IDNR sites start to require you to use non-toxic. Waterfowl hunters have been doing it for over a decade now, and we're starting to see other states that are even taking it a step further than we have here in Illinois. I even know in California, it's pretty much, even some of the rifle hunters are required to use, a non-toxic round. So just keep that in mind as you're looking through those site-specific regulations. It should show you, or should tell you, if that site does require non-toxic, or if you're okay to use lead. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about the methods of take. Obviously, in a lot of cases for fur bear hunting, it's going to be dependent on the specific site that you are hunting at. If you're hunting at private land, it opens up a plethora of different firearms and different methods of take that you can utilize, both at night and during daylight hours. So private land can be a very good opportunistic approach to getting hunting access, particularly with fur bearers. I have knocked on, I don't know how many doors and made countless phone calls. It is very difficult to get deer and turkey permission. Coyote hunting or beaver trapping or raccoon trapping is pretty stinking easy. As Curtis kind of mentioned, a lot of these species get a bad rap from a lot of people. A lot of people don't want them around their property. They're full on. Yeah, go ahead, go hunt there. And you can start to build that relationship. And maybe now you've been coyote hunting there for a year. You've, helped him out, taking a few of the coyotes that he wants off of there. Now maybe you have deer hunting permission. And so I do want to urge you to at least think about private land access and seeing if you can secure that, because again, it opens up and allows you to, in my opinion, use more productive and more effective ammunition and rifle calibers, which I think for coyote is pretty important. Because again, you may have one that runs into your calling setup at 30 yards that's inside of a shotgun range. The majority of coyote hunts I've been at, they're way past that. They're 100, 150. They may slowly come in, or they may just pop out and give you a look and go away. And so being able to make that shot is important, and make sure that shot's ethical, humane, and quick. So private land is a very good option, especially because, as you can see here, 96% of Illinois is privately owned. We are kind of at the bottom of the barrel in terms of public land acreage across the state, where other states, Pennsylvania, they're almost 40 to 50% of their state acreage is considered public land. And so there's a lot more opportunity. So private land can really help open up those avenues. Another really good program I want to highlight is the Illinois Recreational Access Program. This is a program where essentially the Illinois DNR leases private land from landowners and allows the public to come and hunt that piece of property. I have never done it for Furbearer. My wife was awarded an archery permit for deer about 2 years ago, and the IRAP program, it's set up very well. You apply online. You can find it on DNR's website, or you can just Google Illinois Recreational Access Program and it'll pop up. But how the deer hunting worked is we essentially had, I think it was 55-acre piece of land, and we had it for 2.5 weeks completely to ourselves. So essentially we basically got private land access, and luckily it was during rut, so it was a pretty good time. So I do highly recommend at least looking into the IRAP program. Now I will say, they don't have a ton of coverage across the state. You'll find that it's very concentrated in pockets, and I know they are looking to expand. They're always trying to sign up new landowners. I actually think there's a webinar, I think it might actually be tonight or next week, with Pheasants Forever in the Illinois Recreational Access Program for landowners. So if you're interested in enrolling your land, but another good program worth checking out, even if it's outside of Furbearer. They have deer spots, they have turkey spots, they have dove spots, they have waterfowl spots, they have trapping spots. There's quite a bit out there. Now, this is a little piece of paper that I take if I'm asking for private land permission. It is not required. It's not legally required. You are allowed to hunt on somebody's property if they give you permission, and they are not liable for you. When it becomes an issue is if you were to pay them. If you even pay them $5, at that point, they become liable. And so a lot of cases, 95% of the time when I ask a landowner for permission, it's no, someone is already hunting here, or no, I'm concerned about liability and that kind of thing. This can take it the next step, and it basically just says, hey, I'm not going to sue you, even though you're not legally, held to that. They're probably not going to, trust me as I just show up and ask to hunt their property. And so having this little piece of paper that you can fill out, they can fill out, it just kind of ups your professionalism, and may just be that last little bit you need to get permission. So definitely worth carrying. DNR has it on their website. Here's a link down here. So we'll send that obviously when we send out the PowerPoint, so you can get access to that card if you want it. Always good. I always keep a few in my car just in case. You never know when you're going to see, a coyote run across a field, or you're going to see a bunch of geese hitting a cornfield that you want to try to get permission on. So having a couple of these handy at all times is good. It is very important to know where your boundaries are. Not every boundary in Illinois is marked. They don't need to legally be marked. It is up to you as the hunter to know where the boundaries are and to know where you are in relation to those boundaries. The easiest way I have found to do it is using various GPS apps. There's a couple really good ones on your mobile phone that can show you public land boundaries. Again, they're probably not accurate down to the foot level, but at least gives you an idea. So some of those are Hunt Stand is a fairly popular one. One of the big ones is Onyx Hunt. So there's lots of different options. Or again, those hunter fact sheets are going to have a map. And you can also go to huntillinois.org. DNR has now built this. We kind of talked about that website, but they've also built a mapping system in there that kind of overlays the property boundaries on Google Earth type imagery, so you can really see. But another thing I do want to point out, Are you familiar with the purple paint law? This is something when I first started hunting, 15 years ago, I probably wasn't familiar with until I started seeing a bunch of purple trees. I'm like, what in the world? Why are people painting a bunch of purple trees? Well, there is a law called the purple paint law. And essentially, purple paint on a tree or on a fence post essentially is the exact same as a no trespassing sign. So just keep that in mind. If you see purple paint on trees, that lets you know you're at a boundary. But again, not every boundary is marked and not every boundary legally has to be marked. But it's up to you as the hunter to know where you are and where you are in relation to those boundaries. Now, for fur bear hunting, we're not wearing blaze orange unless you're doing it while a firearm deer season is open, which there are some additional hunting regulations to pay attention to if you are going to try to coyote hunt during that specific week. If you're in a county that has firearm deer hunting, again, those are all spelled out in the digest, but a lot of it just makes sure that somebody isn't up there without a deer tag and they're saying they're coyote hunting even though they're really deer hunting. So that's kind of the logic there. But if you are out there doing anything while a firearm deer season is open, whether it's youth, whether it's first shotgun, second shotgun, late season muzzleloader, whether it's a CWD firearm season, it's always important to know when those deer firearm seasons are to make sure that you can A, be out there, and B, that you need to wear your orange. All right, so the nice thing about hunting in Illinois, it's fairly cheap. If you look around at some of the other neighboring states and other states, outside of kind of those close neighborings, we're fairly cheap to hunt, especially for residents. Now, if you're a non-resident coming to hunt Illinois, we're on the higher end of that. It costs a lot to hunt here if you don't live here. But in terms of resident, it's fairly cheap. You're getting your base hunting license for roughly around $12. There's different levels of a hunting license, whether you're a senior, over 65. There's a couple different variations that you can choose from, but you'll just need a base hunting license and a state habitat stamp, which is $5 to be able to legally fur bear hunt. If you want to start trapping, you need to just add on a trapping license. And so you could fur bear hunt and trap for what, $27. That's pretty inexpensive. You can't do much for that these days. I don't even know if you could go to a movie with one person for that. Up next, hunter and trapper education is required. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the class structure of hunter safety because it's a little bit different than trapper education. Hunter safety in Illinois can be conducted online. You can take it, if you're over 18, you can take the entirety of the course online, which I recommend. Or if you want a more kind of in-person formal setting, you can sign up for an in-person class. I will say those fill up rather quickly. There's not a lot of volunteer instructors these days, as well as if you're a youth, you have to take, that field portion or that in-class portion. And so those often get filled up by youth who have to take it. So I do recommend taking the online version just because you could do it at your own pace. It saves your progress. Now the in-person are free, where the online costs, I think, $20 or $25. And again, that's just because it's run through a third party who manages it and created the online curriculum and all that stuff. But trapper education in Illinois, it is pretty simple. I will say I completed the course again online in roughly, I don't know, probably an evening and some change. So again, another course that's fairly easy to work through, but these courses are not only required to hunt and trap, but they're vital, especially hunter safety and trapper education. You're going to learn a lot of safety features. And especially as we get into trapping later in this webinar, Curtis will kind of illustrate and talk about how you can really damage a hand, you can lose a finger, you can severely hurt yourself, and you can fall out of a tree stand. And so these are really good courses to build out on. Now, there are some exemptions if you were born on or before January 1st, 1980, you do not need to take hunter safety. You're technically what they call grandfathered in. I still recommend taking it because there's still some really good information in there. And if you're born after 1998, you are not required to take trapper education. But again, I recommend just taking it. It's a really good course. It's designed to just give you the basics. A few other requirements, specifically with some of these species that Curtis talked about, where their populations are highly regulated, are bobcats and river otters. Those are kind of the two big ones we have to think about in Illinois. Now, bobcat hunting is a little bit difficult, and we'll talk about that as we kind of get into strategies. But what the biggest distinction and what I want to point out right now is you cannot bobcat hunt unless you have a bobcat tag. Almost view bobcats like deer. You have to have a tag for them. It's not just you can harvest it under that hunting license. You actually have to have a physical tag for it. Now in Illinois, again, bobcat population is fairly low compared to the number of people who are interested in hunting bobcats. So it is a lottery application. It's $5 application. You do not get refunded if you do not get drawn. That money is set aside and goes into, I think, the state habitat fund that is again used for public land stuff or for habitat management on public land. But just please keep this in mind. Bobcat tags must be purchased or drawn before you even try to hunt. So just keep that in mind. You'll also need a CITES tag. I'll let Curtis kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so the Bobcat permit or harvest authorization, that's something you'll have to draw before the fact, but these CITES tags, this is an after the fact kind of thing. And so the CITES tags, I'll explain what they are, but they apply to river otter and bobcats in Illinois. And what CITES is the Center for the International Trade for Endangered Species and Lookalikes. And both bobcats and river otter are on Appendix 2, meaning they're not endangered species, but they are lookalikes. Bobcat is a spotted cat. Most of the spotted cats in the world are endangered. Bobcat and lynx might be the only two that aren't. So that's why it's a CITES species. Every other species of otter in the world besides river otter is endangered. Um, River otter is a awesome conservation success story.
Yes.
River otters were extirpated over much of the country, but have been brought back. Actually, some trappers down in Louisiana figured out a nifty way to trap them with number 11 double long springs, which I'll show kind of an example of what that looks like later. But it's just a small, strong double long string trap, and it was strong enough when the otters caught it would hold them, but it wouldn't hurt them because they couldn't jockey the trap around, so they could all be relocated. And I think now we're up to like 29 different states that have had otter relocated, and all of those states, the population is growing or steady, and most of those states now have a season. And oh, by the way, the population is still steady and growing. So anyway, that's what CITES are. That's why you have to get the tag, because they look like endangered species. And you have to have the tag if you take it to a taxidermist or you take it to a fur buyer, because that allows interstate or even international commerce with that pelt. So that's what that's all about. You got to get it after you actually get the cat or the otter. You have to get it within 48 hours. It's another $5. But I think they just mail it to you now. Pretty easy thing. You'll snap it on the actual pelt, or if the critter's still whole, you have to work the CITES tag in the mouth and out the eye, so it's attached that way. But once that's on it, then you can take it to your taxidermist or a fur buyer or a tannery or a furrier or whatever you're going to do with it.
And I will just kind of reiterate the importance of that, because this is federal, so that's a big violation to get a CITES violation. So you want to make sure you're definitely listening to what Curtis said and get that permit or get that registration after, within that 48 hours.
Yeah, that's a Lacey Act violation.
Yeah.
So like what a normal, no wildlife violation is good, but a normal wildlife violation, you're dealing with the state Illinois Conservation Police. But Lacey Act, I don't know, that's some Men in Black stuff. I don't know.
Yeah. No thanks.
I don't want to mess around with that stuff.
Yeah, no thanks on either of them, but particularly the Men in Black. So kind of continuing along with fur bear hunting, a little bit about legal game. Obviously, we've kind of mentioned several throughout. Probably the most targeted, the most harvested, the most talked about, the most thought about is coyote. Fox is also quite fun. There are some actually fairly productive fox areas, especially up in kind of the Chicagoland area. There's some really big hunt clubs that do the old school kind of European style of fox hunting with the horses and that whole shebang. So there's a whole nother side of fur bear hunting that we're not even really getting into. But striped skunk is another popular one that's actually just like coyote, open year round. Woodchuck, which is kind of your groundhogs, raccoon, which are quite good to eat, and then opossum. Now, what I really enjoy about coyote hunting or raccoon or really any fur bear hunting is the ability to do it when you can't really do anything else. So for instance, the really fun thing about coyote, especially this time of year, first of all, I'll let kind of Curtis highlight this in a little bit, but their pelts are in great condition. This is when you really want to try to harvest them. But two, you can hunt them 24/7 this time of year. So basically, I think it's from November 10th through February 15th. You can hunt 24/7. So you can hunt at night. You can use your fancy spotlights. If you really want to get fancy, you can get, thermal scopes. I have a few friends who have thermal scopes in their rifles. So they're out there with basically, yeah, it's fun. It's cool. There's a lot of neat things you get to do, but also you get to be out there when no one else is out there. And if you've never spent, more than a couple hours in the woods at dark, you're going to learn a lot about yourself. There are eerie sounds. There's cool things. You may see flying squirrels. You may see all these different things that you're never going to see because it's really a different world out there in the evening than it is during the daylight. So that's kind of the appeal for me a lot about fur bear hunting is just the ability to use different tools, the ability to do it at different times, and also to get fur out of it. I know we're going to talk about this a little bit as we kind of move on, but I want to just kind of mention it now. There's been a lot of pushback on fur bear hunting and the fur trade, so to speak. But at the same time, we're hearing a lot of feedback about all these microplastics that are getting tossed in everything, that we're starting to accumulate a bunch of these plastics inside of us. And a lot of it is because we're using synthetic materials for just about everything, where this is about as natural as you can get. So fur bear hunting can be a lot of fun, but you can also get a lot of reward out of it, a lot of usable product, whether it's food or for warmth. So now we're going to talk a little bit about fur bear hunting methods. We're going to primarily talk about coyote as we kind of go through a couple different examples, but we'll talk about the majority of the species that we kind of highlighted. Now, for the majority of quote unquote predator hunting that you're going to be doing, that's, coyote, fox, bobcat, you're going to be trying to mimic a prey animal. So there's different vocalizations that you can use, whether you're trying to entice an animal to think there's an easy meal, there's already a wounded rabbit over there, or you can also do different, let's say coyote, for instance, you can do coyote vocalizations and try to make it into almost a territorial dispute type of thing. And so there's a lot of these different interactions you can do. You can play with different vocalizations, you can play with different calls and try to really make it seem realistic. And that's the cool thing about predator hunting and predator calling, is that it's more of an art than it is a science. And it's one of those things you slowly get better at the more you do, and the more you watch how coyotes and how bobcats are reacting to the different vocalizations you are, or that you're doing. So it can be a lot of fun. I'll do a quick demonstration of just kind of a basic call I have here. This is kind of the one I use, been using it for quite a while. It's just a Primos still, it's backwards, so you probably can't read it anyway, but it's a Primos still cottontail, cheaper than dirt. I think I got it for like $6. But again, all it's doing is trying to imitate the sound of a wounded rabbit, because that sounds like an easy meal for a predator. So I'll give a quick headphone warning. If you're wearing headphones, you may want to turn your volume down. I'll give it a few seconds before I start hammering on this thing, because it's quite loud and quite squealy. So you may want to turn your volume down just a hair. All right, and I'll point away, so hopefully it doesn't sound too loud. And so all we're trying to do is mimic that sound of a dying prey animal, and this one just happens to be a rabbit. I like to try to choose a call that kind of matches the area. So if I'm in an area that has no rabbit habitat or has, I'm probably not going to find much success using a call like this. I might try to use, some other animal dying or something to that effect. And so you can really start to play with these different vocalizations. And that's what's really cool about kind of the next thing I want to touch on is these e-collars. These are really nice. This is actually a Fox Pro Patriot. I will say I am not the biggest fan of this particular model. It doesn't have a rechargeable battery pack, which I find a little frustrating. And the remote that it comes with takes a 9-volt battery. So just kind of be thinking about those things. But the really cool thing about these e-collars is this one came with 100 sounds pre-built into it. It's ready to go. It's got a nice little remote that I can use to control it from a distance with a nice antenna. And I can just go set it and point it in the direction that I want that sound to go. I can go back to my spot 30, 50 yards back, however far you want to get. And we'll talk about that as we show some maps later and start playing those vocalizations. But I'll let Curtis
Great.
tell us. Yeah.
Great for people who are not good on a call, because when it comes to using electronic calls, it's predator hunting or snow geese, and that's about it.
Yeah,
So
that I'm actually glad you brought that up because while these are nice to have, you can't use it for everything. In Illinois, most people probably don't know this. You can use this for deer. You cannot use it for turkey. You cannot use it for waterfowl. So basically, the three things you're using it for are deer, which again, I would never use it. A grunt call, you're just blowing air. It's pretty simple if you really want to call. Or snow geese, like Curtis said during that snow goose conservation order, they allow electronic callers to be utilized, or fur bear hunting.
Yep. But then, yeah, so the other methods that people will hunt fur bears, predator calling is definitely the most common, I'd say, for coyote, fox, but the use of trailing hounds is the most common for raccoon by far. And there's definitely still people who will run coyotes and fox with dogs. But yeah, raccoon's the number one, and this is a lot of fun. If you meet somebody with some raccoon dogs, you're going to want to make that person a friend, because it's like Dan said, the woods is like a different dimension at night. You might be out there every day and feel like you know the place like the back of your hand, and there's no surprises, and then you're out there at night and everything becomes new again. All the animals that you're used to seeing, the birds, they're nowhere to be seen. They're disappeared. They're gone. And now a whole suite of animals that you didn't even know were there, like flying squirrels and weasels running around and possums and raccoons and all these nighttime animals come out, and it's pretty cool. It's definitely fun to be out there. Not to mention, even the familiar animals act different. Deer. Every raccoon hunter out there knows that like big bucks, you can walk right by them at night, and half the time they don't even run away. I've walked by, I don't know, 30, 40 yards from some of the biggest deer I've ever seen in my life, with spotlights and dogs going, the whole 9 yards, and the deer he doesn't move. He just watches you walk by, and then you come back by an hour later, he's still sitting there. So it's cool to be in the woods at night. Can't overestimate that. Definitely a different experience. And then the other way is just incidental to other hunting. A lot of people, when they're
That's how I started.
yeah, archery hunting or firearms hunting deer, and you see a coyote, and there you go. It's an incidental take at that point. But I mean, you're up there hunting, but you're after deer or something other than Furbearer, so it's called incidental. But that's the primary ones. I will mention for calling, some people will call like raccoons too. That can be an effective method. I have done it before. You find den trees, and you can come up, especially late in the year, like right now, getting into January and even early February, and you hit usually the caller will have a coon squalor, or it'll have something like that, raccoons fighting or squalls or something, and it's just a horrible sound. It sounds like a demon under your bed or something. It's really a terrifying noise, but you play that next to a den tree, and that old raccoon that's asleep in there thinks somebody's trying to MMA him down at the bottom of the tree, and he comes out to fight. And I mean, sometimes you turn on the sound, and it's 30 seconds later, you got a 28-pound raccoon bearing down on you. So
Yeah.
you better be ready when you flip that switch.
Oh, that's good. We had a question, and this kind of fits perfect with kind of this what we're going to talk about here. I'm just going to go quickly to this slide, and we'll go back. But we had a question asking, are you better to burst call, meaning do a few vocalizations, wait, or just constantly call? Now, I'll give my thought, and then kind of let Curtis give his thought as well. Personally, I find the burst to be a little bit more effective, particularly early in my calling set. If you think about, what you're trying to mimic, a dying rabbit, maybe it got hit by a hawk and a hawk is out there dragging it around. If you just do it for, a couple seconds, that's how I like to start, just doing a couple quick short bursts. And then if I'm not getting a response, then I might start letting it go a little bit longer and a little bit longer and a little bit longer. But typically in nature, there's not going to be, a rabbit that's out there dying for 20 minutes straight. So I do recommend breaking it up to some extent and also throwing in different vocalizations. When Curtis and I were out the other day, he was running the remote and picking the vocalizations. And I noticed he'd do a bunch of like rabbit prey being wounded and then, wait a few seconds and then switch towards a coyote. So it sounded like, oh, there's already something coming into this meal. So then you're kind of getting that territorial response, but also that still kind of easy prey item. So a lot of it is just kind of playing with it and seeing how that individual animal is reacting to your calls if they're coming in. But I always recommend, especially when you first start calling at that initial set, that you don't just let it go for a minute or two, that you do a couple quick bursts, give it some time again, because that can really start to build that, like, oh, what is that? Okay, I didn't hear it. And then it starts again and can really trick that animal into thinking it sounds a little bit more realistic. Anything to add on that?
No, I'll just say most of the pros, like it's standard procedure, get to your calling location and then be absolutely quiet for 10 minutes. Let the woods go back to sleep before you turn it on. I know it's hard because it's hard to be patient. I know I struggle with it all the time, but um, 10 minutes of quiet and then start calling, but start calling quiet because you never know how close an animal might be to you. And if you are blasting that thing at level 99 and there's a red fox sleeping 100 yards away with ears, 4 times better than you're going to blast him through the roof like he's at a Led Zeppelin concert. So you start low and work your way up with that stuff. And then at the end, like get low at the end. And I do like the breaks, especially if an animal is being cautious and coming in slow, that animal might have been called before, and so sometimes it's the breaks that make them come in because they hear it and they're like, oh, that sounds juicy and tasty. But there was some people by something that sounded like that before, and then it stops. Like, oh, it's gone. Oh, it's back again. I feel like starting and stopping just really, it's almost like when you got the lure in front of the bass and you're just
Yeah, you
jiggling.
just stop that twitch and wham.
Yeah, you're trying to make them just nail it, and so it's
Yeah.
kind of the same thing
It,
here.
it's like music. They say, a lot of music, the power is in the pauses, or the power is in the silent moments. So definitely holds true. With this slide, I kind of want to talk through what a typical set would look like. This is a piece of public land. I will say, just in case anybody can identify it from the road markings or the creek, you cannot hunt coyotes here, which is kind of why we're using this as an example, not to spot shame anybody. So if you happen to know this place, you cannot coyote hunt there. But what I like to do, I do a lot of scouting, whether it's for deer, waterfowl, and even for bear. And there's a lot of people I hunt with, especially growing up predator hunting, that never scouted forever. There's no point. They just go out to a field, set this up, and they'd sit there for 30 minutes and see if one comes in. I can tell you, scouting really pays off, especially on some of these public lands. You want to be where the coyotes are. If you're just blowing your vocals into a forest that's just a giant void of anything, you're not really going to get a response. And so scouting can pay off quite a bit. And with coyotes, we're primarily looking for scat. Scat is going to be largely white in color. It's going to be your standard dog size scat. Looks like dog poop, except it's white. And a lot of that white is from the calcium from things that they're eating, and it kind of digests out that way. So white scat looks, if you find a lot of white scat, there's a coyote nearby. Another really good strategy that for some reason I don't see a lot of people giving thought to. When I first started coyote hunting, I did this just naturally because it kind of made sense logically to me. But I would go out and use this as like a locator call, like you would for turkey. So I'd go out, right at dusk or right after dusk, hit a coyote howl vocalization, and instantly you're going to start hearing them go off. And once they start calling, well, now you know at least roughly where they like to spend some time, and then maybe that next day you can start going after them, or even later that evening. So scouting can really pay off. Now, once I find a spot that I decide I want to hunt, I always, it's just like deer hunting. You want that wind in your face. With this kind of map and illustration we put here, we put a few kind of, possible approaches that coyotes will make. And if you look closely, they always try to circle downwind. They may not make it that far. They may bust you before then, or hopefully you get your shot before they, circle completely downwind. But that's typically what they're going to want to do naturally. When they hear a prey or a territory dispute howl, they want to circle downwind so they can smell and investigate that sound a little bit further before they, just rush in there. They're very cautious, extremely cautious. They'll take steps, they'll stop, they'll take steps, they'll stop. And so it's really important to pay attention to what that wind's doing, because the second they get downwind, they are just as wary as deer are. The second they get a whiff of you, they're gone. But also pay attention to your approach. Now, in this example, it would be pretty easy for me to get from the road to that location without casting my scent over a whole woodlot. But those are the kind of things you need to think about. I think about coyote almost the same way I think about deer. I'm playing the wind the same. I'm playing the sun the same. Oftentimes, I like to have the sun at my back. If the sun's in my face, shining directly at me, I'm stuck out. He's going to see me. If I have that sun at my back, it creates a little bit less contrast and he can't see as well. But what it also does is really light up any coyote that comes in front of me, and you'll be able to see him a lot. So I'm paying attention to the wind as well as the sun. Now, I do like a little bit of wind. I don't necessarily like to hunt a ton when it's completely calm, for a few different factors. One, it gives me a little bit more predictability in how I expect the coyotes to approach, because obviously, again, they want to circle downwind. If there isn't much wind, they can't really do that. But also, it gives some directionality to your scent. If there's no wind and your scent is just kind of casting this even dispersal over this whole area, I'd rather have some directionality with a light wind that just pushes my scent and gets it the heck away. So I try to find, days that have the good wind that I want. So eight to about 15. After about 15 or 20, I really don't spend too much time coyote calling, just because at that point there's a lot of noise out there. So the calls don't necessarily carry as much or have as great a reach. So again, I like that predictability of the wind, and I want to sit in my spot for, like Curtis said, a few minutes before I start calling. And I'll just go ahead. It's embarrassing. My first several coyote hunts, I had a pretty bad mess up. The second I sat down, I started calling, or I'd play the e-caller and be like, oh, it's going to take him a couple minutes. I still have time to get ready, get situated, load the gun, get everything ready. You may have a coyote who instantly reacts to that call and just comes in charging. So I never start calling before I'm completely set up. I've kind of pinpointed where I expect them to come from and kind of visualize what that shot may look like. I might even swing my firearm back and forth just to try to make sure I can hit those spots. And then I may begin calling, because it could happen very, very quick. And like Curtis said, I'm pretty much doing that for, 10, 15 minutes. Give it 20 at the most, and then if I'm not really getting a response, I'll pick up and try to move to a new set. So it's a lot like turkey hunting. It's you're out there, you're calling, seeing if you're getting a response. You're not, okay, move to a different spot, try it again.
The one caveat with that is if you do have a bobcat tag, bobcats come in very slow, very cautiously. So for coyotes and foxes, they say, yeah, like 80% of them come in within 20 minutes. So really, these are short hunts. But for bobcats, it's more like the average is about 45 minutes. And if you see them, you'll know why. I mean, they take a couple steps, they stop, then they decide they don't want it anymore. Then they take a couple more steps. It's a cat, So just imagine a cat. That's exactly what a bobcat does, and I love watching bobcats
Oh,
because
it's so just that sneak.
but they also seem to change their mind with every step. It's just It's like what's going on in that mind, and yet they're so athletic and yet so lazy.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool animals.
Oh, all right. All right. Oh, I got to go back one slide. Oh, we talked about that. All right. You want to talk about hounds a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. So got Bergie there howling. Just look at that shot. You got the breath coming out on a cold night. Just what's not to love about that? But for most people, if you're hunting raccoons or whatever you hunt, if you use dogs to hunt, even if you're hunting birds, you got a bird dog. Like that dog's your life. Your life revolves around that dog. They're members of your family and best friends wrapped into one and with a real utility. And I do know of people that have got into raccoon hunting because they got a raccoon hound from the shelter. They'd never hunted anything in the world, but they got a raccoon hound from the shelter and they fall in love with the dog. It's a great dog. And they every time they go to the woods, like this dog he wants to take me to the woods. And so you got dogs leading people to the woods, and then people try raccoon hunting, and basically you get the dog almost ushering the people into hunting, and that's happened, and you'll never see an animal as happy as a dog when it's hunting, whether it's a raccoon hound like Bergie here barking up this tree, or it's your lab bringing back a duck, or um, a GSP running through the field looking for pheasants. Like that is the best example of pure joy in the world. I'm convinced of that. But
I agree. I'll tell you, I went on my first raccoon hunt last year. It wasn't even a true hunt. It was what we call a chase. So we didn't have any firearms, and my goodness, that it was probably the most fun I've ever had. It was just an absolute
they
blast
sound
watching them.
awesome at night. Just
Yeah.
something about them at night in the woods, and it's a calm night, and you just hear the beautiful voices, and
And
it
you
is
can hear the
it's a
second
good
they
feeling.
tree one. Their howls change, the barking, and you're
Jeez,
okay,
yeah.
time to go.
Yeah, but unfortunately, it is kind of an equipment. There's a lot of equipment needed. It's not just the hounds, which of course are going to take up a lot of your time and resources there, but pretty much all your hunters now have the electronic dog collars, the alpha systems where they can see GPS coordinates of their dogs at all time. They can see where they've run, how far they're running. They can even communicate with them through the collars. So crazy stuff they've got here in the past 10 years or so. You have to have really good lights. You're out there at night, also really good spotlights. Because once the raccoon's up in a tree, imagine if that's a 100-foot tree. Do you think your normal deer hunting headlamp is going to shine a beam to the top of that tree well enough to pick out a raccoon? Probably not. So, really, really good lights, much better than lights that hunters normally use. You got to have your waders and your brush pants because it's up to the dog and the raccoon where they go, not you. But you have to follow, so you have to have a means to get there. Um,
And they will be walking through some thick stuff.
oh,
Gosh.
oh yeah, and it's in the dark, so
Yeah,
good
yeah.
luck on picking the best path unless you really know where you're going. So, uh, a lot of work walking. You're just sitting there, think you're listening to dogs, and then all of a sudden it's time to walk, and then it's time to work. So, and a lot of people will carry like a little handheld raccoon squaller because that can get them to look at you when they're up in the tree. Sometimes they'll be maybe crouch down in the tree where it's hard to see them. And if you don't see that eye shine, you can't find them. So you hit that coon squaller, and it's just enough for him to be like, "Hey, who's that?" And then you can spot him and hopefully get your shot. All right, and that brings us into trapping. So, not all fur bearers can be hunted, but we've got the whole list here that can be trapped. So, trapping's legal method for all those species there. I won't read through the list. You can read it, but a lot of diversity, a lot of different things you can do from running weasel boxes, which are essentially a mouse trap in a little box that looks like a wood duck nesting box. You can trap weasels, a really cool little critter there, all the way up to setting footholds for coyotes, to setting big body grips for beaver, like in this picture here. Um, and then, of course, we've mentioned it several times, but Bobcat is the one you do have to draw a permit before you can attempt to pursue. So just
Yeah.
Don't forget about that.
I do want to just quickly mention a little kind of anecdote about trapping. If you're new to the outdoors and you're new to kind of this whole sphere of hunting and sustainable resources and getting your own protein, if you spend a season, just a season trapping, not even the full season, just run a trap line for a week or two, I promise you will become a better hunter. There is, in my opinion, there's not a person that understands wildlife movement, that understands wildlife ecology better than trappers. Hunters, let's say I'm out there shotgun hunting for deer. All I'm trying to do is get a deer within, 150 yards. If I'm with my bow, maybe 30 yards. A trapper is trying to get something to step in a spot like that just by looking at the landscape, using their scouting. And so you will learn more about the natural world and wildlife in general, and how to track, how to scout trapping than you will doing any of these other activities. So I just want to give that quick anecdote that trapping can be very beneficial. Just building on that knowledge. I think trappers are by far the best biologists, ecologists out there.
That's a good point. I mean, trapping forces you to get in the head of the animal you're pursuing. And not only that, but to think about all other possible animals that could be
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
So it's really thinking about wildlife on a whole new level. And not to mention trappers have to be there every day. You have to run your traps every day. There's no taking a day off. It's not like hunting. Like even hunting, you're out there most days, but maybe all of a sudden you wake up and there's 6 inches of snow and it's -20, and
Or you
I'm
wake
not
up with a
going today.
migraine. Yeah.
That's not an option with trapping. You have to go. Doesn't matter if you have a migraine, if there's 6 inches of snow, you have to run those traps if it's at all humanly possible. That's why most trappers will get a partner so that if something comes up and you do get sick, you can pass off your maps or your GPS to somebody and they can still run your traps and be legal without you having to get out there when you're sick or whatever's ailing you. So let's get right into the equipment. Again, this is the intro. We're going to have webinars and in-person workshops that are going to be nothing but trapping. So we're going to get way more into the weeds here. But first off, let's just terminology. Footholds. You will see a lot of places, including on the IDNR webpage, which is unfortunate, the use of the word leg hold. Okay. This is, it means the same thing, but it doesn't. Not to a non-trapper, because none of these traps, they're all designed to catch an animal by the foot, by the pad. You want a half pad or a full pad catch. You're not trying to catch anything up on the leg. If you catch something up on a leg, you've used the wrong size trap. So leg hold is just not a correct name, and it implies to non-trappers that people are using these giant bear traps and trying to catch stuff way up here, and it's not the case. You're using a small little device like a pair of handcuffs and trying to catch them right across the pad. Yeah, there, Dan's got a 1.5 coil spring right there. Foothold. So again, you're not wrong if you say leg hold, but I think foothold is just a more appropriate word. So that's what we're using. And this is a live restraining trap. All these traps on this page are live restraining traps. So these footholds designed to capture an animal by the foot and hold it alive. Now we got long springs and coil springs. Obviously, long spring is that long spring. If you look up there in the picture in the top left there, it's got one long spring coming out of it. You can have a single long spring or a double long spring. This is a single long spring. To the right of it is a coil spring trap. So now instead of the spring being that long piece of metal, which is just a mechanical spring that you have to depress and then puts pressure on the jaws, a coil spring has a coiled piece of wire that actually puts pressure behind the coils. So there's two coils on either side of the corners of the jaws of that trap. That's the powerhouse of the trap, is those coils, that twisted piece of wire. And you can have a double coil spring, you can have a quad coil spring. You can have some with 4 springs on them to make them more strong, especially for people trapping in icy and snow conditions to punch up through that stuff. Another type of live restraining foothold is the enclosed trigger trap, or some people will call them the foot encapsulating trap. The slang term is dog proof. Dog proofs, or people will call them just DPs, which is a brand. A Duke DP stands for dog proof. Anyway, all those names are the same. It's a device that the trigger assembly is completely enclosed within that trap. So it's designed primarily for raccoons, and it's pretty much a raccoon specific trap. You can catch skunks and possums occasionally, every once in a while, something else, but it's 90% or better raccoon only, because it takes advantage of how the finger dexterity of a raccoon. He reaches in there, he has to grab the trigger, and most of them you pull up. Some of them you can push or pull before it fires. And then it also completely encloses their paw in a trap. So it's really a humane trap, because there's no way that they could get at anything to accidentally chew on their digits, which um, happens with animals like raccoons when they're chewing on a trap. Eventually, below the jaws, their digits can get numb. And when they're chewing on the traps, they can incidentally chew on their digits. And that counts as trap damage. So any trap that allows room for a raccoon to do that would fail the BMPs, which we're going to talk about later. But the foot encapsulating trap is the best at that. They can't even get at it. So great humane trap for raccoons. And it actually scores better on the BMP standards than the cage trap, the box trap that's next to it, which I just like to bring up because a lot of people look at all these traps and they just think, okay, well, that box, that's got to be the most humane option all the time. And a box, a cage can be an excellent trap in certain scenarios, but the thing people don't think about is wild animals are still going to attempt to get out of there. And you see a lot of injuries on the rostrum, the side of the nose, because animals will get to the corner and just try to push out. And so they can damage their teeth, they can break teeth off on these, they can damage their rostrum. There's some you can wrap them with a little finer squared wire to help them not be able to get anything out of there, and some things you can make boxes better with, for sure. But it's definitely incorrect to assume that that's always the most humane trap that you can use, because it's just not the case. Now we're getting into the killer type trap. So we talked about all those live restraining traps. Now these traps have a completely different purpose. These are designed to catch animals, but instead of holding them until you can get there to either release them or dispatch them, these are designed to kill them in the same way that big cats kill animals. So usually it's through asphyxiation. Either they will break the spine basically behind the skull and kill them real quick that way, or they'll asphyxiate them by compressing their thoracic cavity basically, which again, same tactics big cats use, and it's the exact same way that mouse traps use. So if you've set a mouse trap in your house, you've set a body grip trap, killer trap. Um, and all these other traps, that one there in the picture, that's either a 330 or 280. It's one of the bigger ones with double springs on it. That's basically just a mouse trap for bigger mice. You know, that's intended for animals like beaver, which get up to, I mean, geez, I think the biggest beaver ever is up in the 90 to 100 pound range, but you can commonly see them 40 to 60 pounds. So pretty big animal floating out there. And then below that is a snare. So these cable devices, there's all sorts of different cable devices. In Illinois, only the only snares that are legal have to be set at least half underwater. So not using any dry land snares or cable restraints here in Illinois. Other states are different. Here it's snares and they're in the water. And that's just a cable device that's designed to catch the animal and then not allow it to reach the surface. So these are primarily used for beaver here in Illinois. All right, so methodology, got a little picture there. It's just kind of a unique picture. That's one way you can trap raccoons and other critters that eat fish in a riffle. Any place there's moving water. Once some of the water starts icing up, I really like to wrap a pan in aluminum foil and just set it right in the riffle, and that's all you need. That's your bait. So there's actually nothing that smells. There's no attractant, that has almost no appeal to domestic critters, because there's no fish, there's no muskrat meat. All it is a shiny piece of metal, and the raccoons just love it. Sometimes they'll go in with both hands, and you'll catch them with both paws. But anyway, that's why I threw that picture in there. But a land set is obviously any set on land, doesn't touch water. Um, and here you're using footholds. You can use the smaller body grips that are not bigger than 7 inches. You can also use cages. Now, water sets are any set that touches water. So pretty easy to understand there. And now a little bit different, you can use the bigger body grip traps as long as they're at least a half underwater. You can also use the snares the same way if they're a half underwater. So a few more sets that you can use in the water. But all these sets have to be run every day, and all animals have to be removed from the trap. So it's not like you can go run your trap and, oh, I caught a beaver. I can't carry him. I'll carry him out later. Like you got to remove the animals from the trap each day. All right, trapping is definitely one of the most regulated activities in all of the outdoors. We're not going to go through all the regulations here because we would have you until midnight, and yeah, that's
Probably midnight tomorrow.
too long. Yeah, yeah. So we'll get more into those in specific webinars and in-person workshops that we're going to have. But some of the key things that you need to remember: site exposed bait is a no-no. So this is any animal parts. You cannot have any land sets within 30 feet of site exposed bait. And this is all for to eliminate the possibility of catching raptors. So birds of prey would be looking for any sort of site exposed bait, whether that's feathers or a chunk of meat or fur. And if you have that too close to your foothold, you have a likelihood of catching a bird of prey, which can be released, but obviously trappers want to do everything they can to avoid any incidental capture. So one good way to do that, ensure that you don't have any site exposed bait close to your sets. Now, over 30 feet away is fine. So a lot of people will stake out some bait and maybe trap 100 feet away from that. That's okay, because you're not in danger of catching the birds there at that point. All of your traps have to be tagged with a good metal tag. Most people get the copper trap tags. You can either get your DNR customer number on there or your name and address, but everybody who runs the traps has to have a tag on it. You can have more than one tag on a trap. So if Dan and I were trapping together, we could put both of our tags on the same trap, and then either one of us could run those traps. So good to know if you're getting a trapping partner out there.
Which I
There's
recommend.
Yeah, it's good because, like we said, every day. So if something comes up, having somebody to pawn that responsibility off on is good, and it's good just to not burn yourself out. Maybe take 2 or 3 days, then your partner takes 2 or 3 days, and that way you stay fresh. And trapping's a lot of work. It's yeah. I mean,
Even more
basically,
work when you harvest something.
yeah, the whole thing. I mean, you're carrying heavy metal equipment way into the woods. You're digging, moving dirt, and doing all that stuff. And then once you catch something, you're carrying heavy critters out of the woods and skinning and fleshing. So it's good to have somebody to share that workload with. I think it's fun work because it feels very historic, connected to North American history when you're sitting there working on fur. So I think it's enjoyable, but I don't think anybody would call it easy. It's pretty intense, but yeah, I already mentioned it. Super highly regulated. So before you trap, make sure you read the regulations booklet front to back and always carry it with you. I don't care how many years I trapped. I've trapped now in, I guess, 4 or 5 different states for like 30 years, and I still always carry a regulation booklet on my person. I will not leave without it because there's always something to look back on. And when you're out there, just open up the book and read it. There's no shame in it. It's better to get it right than to get a ticket. All right, now this brings us to the BMPs of trapping. This is pretty cool. This is really one of the biggest like longest lasting research projects involving wildlife ever in any field. It's been going on since 1997, and I put the link there for AFWA's page with all the BMPs on it. You can look through the BMPs, which are the best management practices of trapping. But this is a research study that's been going on for over 30 years now, and all across North America, the United States, and Canada. And it's basically a system of testing the humaneness for traps, for capture devices. So that's not all they test. They test the humaneness, they test the efficacy, the practicality, safety, all these things like Dan was talking about, missing fingers. Hopefully, most all the traps we have today, none of them you should be missing any fingers. I've been snapped in a bunch of traps. The worst I've ever had is a little bruise, but I'll usually snap my hand in a trap 6 or 7 times in a class just to show people because everybody's afraid in the beginning. Even we're using these small traps,
Oh
but
yeah, even when I first started, I was terrified. I have to
oh
squeeze
yeah.
this and then push down. What?
Yeah, you're treating it like you're disarming a bomb, and so it makes people feel a little bit better when I set it and just snap it on my hand, and they see, oh, well, that's not that bad. You don't even have a mark, So they're not quite as scary as they look at first, but that you got to build up that comfortability for sure, and but that's one of the things they tested in the BMPs, and this is actually standards created by ISO. They're international standards, roughly equivalent to the standards they have for the humaneness of agriculture. So now the way they do this, I'll explain it just real quick because we could do a whole webinar just on the BMPs, but they'll pick one species, one state, and they'll go out there and they'll find real life trappers. So let's just say they picked Illinois. They would go to the Illinois Trappers Association. They would come up with some volunteers, 5 or 6 people that would let one technician go along on their trap line. They go on their normal trap line at every single location that they're going to trap the critter in question. So let's say it's raccoon. They would get there and they would go to the technician and say, I'm going to set here. Technician would use a random number generator to determine which trap they're going to set at that location at each spot. And then the technician runs the traps with them. If they catch something, they dispatch the animal. Technician immediately bags it and freezes it. That critter goes to a full necropsy with some of the country's best wildlife veterinarians, and they do a full necropsy. I mean, they peel it down to the toenails. They look at every possible injury, including going through radiographs and x-rays, and they look at the critter from nose to tail, everything, teeth, every injury, and every injury is scored, even if it's an injury that's not necessarily trap related. If an animal gets caught in a trap and another critter comes by and attacks it, that would be scored as trap damage because it's on the BMP. So, um, pretty intense, and they go through and basically use all this to determine which traps pass these international standards. And most of the traps that are readily used today pass with flying colors. And this is not something that's like mandated by law. It's not necessary that you absolutely use BMP equipment. It's just something that trappers have naturally done because they want to be efficient. They don't want to catch non targets. They want to trap efficiently. They want to, all the things that the BMPs are testing are the same things that they want. So, winds up being great, and trapping's come a long way in the last 30 years. I mentioned that bobcats, over 100 caught in footholds and held extra long to do the full biologic workup for them and put a radio collar, and not a single capture mortality is amazing. Just to
That
put
is
that in perspective, when I misnetted birds, I mean, you would lose probably 2 to 3 out of 100 pretty easy. That would just die of stress.
our
So
our capture mortality for wild turkey was about 8 to 10%. So yeah.
yeah, very common. Same with ducks and geese in a pen, and we're talking about just corralling them into a pen. We're not talking about stepping into a trap. So I know they look scary, but they've come a long ways. There's some great advancements from like cast jaws that just spread out the area of the trap is making contact with the paw, to just being able to use smaller, stronger traps, so it actually does catch animals right down on the pad on the paw. Um, Really good stuff. I recommend everybody check out those BMPs. There's some other great research there on the AFWA page, but there's the link. A lot of good stuff there. They have BMP for every single fur bear species. I think they're still working on Wolverine, but they've got like 27 different species that are up that anybody can look at. So
Oh, cool.
pretty cool stuff. And this is what anytime if an animal rights activist tries to challenge trapping as being inhumane, this is the wildlife manager's best friend because in a court of law, this is ironclad. They've got 30 years of thorough research now. So the inhumane argument, it doesn't really hold a candle anymore, and most of them know it. They're not even trying to attack it from that angle anymore, really, to be honest. And it's all thanks to the BMP. So excellent work with that stuff.
Yeah, it's about as rigorous as rigor could be.
Ooh, looky there. I wish I had that fancy fur coat there. And a couple things that you don't think about. You got a paintbrush and some makeup brushes, but fur
Yeah.
has a lot of uses. Um, and fur, other than being incredibly warm and sustainable, it's really relatively ecologically friendly when you think about it. Dan talked about it before, but I promise you, go find your favorite coat. I don't care what it is, Cabela's or Patagonia or whatever, but look into the materials that made that coat.
Like
Figure
this,
out
this
where
is
they
full of
come from.
plastic, just full of
Yeah,
it.
full of plastic, probably petroleum based chemicals, and sourced from all over the place. You might have rayon from South America and something else from here. Like basically, if you fully figure out the carbon footprint for almost any coat, hat, or anything warm you have at home, you're going to be shocked. And you're going to see that just spending a couple beaver or a couple raccoons into a coat or hat is a relatively small price to pay. So it doesn't seem like it because it's sure easy to see the blood trail when you're wearing a fur coat, but I promise you there's a blood trail leading to every coat, just some it's a little harder to spot. But the wearable items is not the only thing. Those are really cool, but I mentioned, yeah, these brushes, high quality makeup brushes and paint brushes are made from real fur. And I've actually known of people who were vegans who stopped being vegans simply because they were artists and they couldn't use synthetic brushes. They were fine not eating meat, but they, as a professional artist, they needed to use the highest quality equipment. And so if they were going to use fur brushes, might as well eat meat, right? That was their that was their thought. So fur's used in a lot of different ways. They even like beaver castor. You'll hear. I know it was popular on like TikTok and Facebook Reels where whenever somebody finds out that beaver castor is a food additive, it gets popular for a while. Um, Now, in reality, it's pretty expensive. So beaver castor is not like a normal food additive anymore because it's too expensive. You have to actually buy some pretty fancy stuff to get beaver castor, but you can actually get some craft beer. I think it's made in like Finland or something, and the name
Huh.
is like BVR. So like they're really trying to sell it, but yeah, it's made with beaver castor as a natural flavoring, and beaver castor, it's apparently you can use it to flavor imitation vanilla and also any imitation berry or like fruit flavor. So pretty cool,
Huh.
and it's a new car smell. So the new car smell that people are used to, that's derived generally from beaver castor. So anyway, this stuff pops up all kinds of places you never even knew. But there's all kinds of ways to utilize your fur, and I really preach people to utilize your fur yourself. Right now, the fur market is suppressed. It just is. One of the big fur auctions, NAFA, North American Fur Auctions. They went bankrupt here 2 or 3 years ago and really put kind of threw a big wrench in the international fur market and hasn't really recovered yet. So Now it's alive and well, so you definitely can sell fur and make a few bucks. You're not going to cover your gas. You're certainly not going to make profit money. You may cover a portion of your gas, but you do need to utilize the animals if you're taking them. So utilize the fur buyer. There's local fur buyers in Illinois, Grunwald Fur and Wool. He's got several pickup locations around the state. You can look him up. We got a link for that later. There's also an auction house that is still in business called Fur Harvesters Auctions. They're a broker. You can send them all your fur, and they basically put them on an auction table in front of international buyers. And if the fur sells, they send you your money, less a little bit of commission. So there are those two options. But again, personal utilization, because if people are only going to pay you a few bucks, fur is still an awesome, awesome resource. You can make some great things. I mean, nothing is warmer. It's so warm that most fur hats that you get made, they're going to be so hot that you can only wear them if you're ice fishing or wearing a snow machine because they're, yeah, just warm. And they say a well-made fur garment lasts for 3 generations. So just imagine if you go out, trap some muskrats, make a hat. 50 years from now, your kid might be wearing that hat, talking about, "Hey, my mom and dad trapped these muskrats in that creek, 50 years ago." That's going to be an article of clothing that's probably cooler than not only all the other clothing you have, but it's probably cooler than most of the guns and other equipment you have too. So definitely something to really think about. And there's a really nice tannery in Iowa, Sleepy Creek Tannery. They have reasonable prices. Turnaround time is not that bad. We've got a link for them here at the end so you can look them up. Most animals you can get tanned for somewhere between 35, 40 bucks. And once they're tanned, I mean, it's premium quality. You can do anything with it. And there's also really great furriers around. I know because I spent some time in Wisconsin. I know there's Wild Things Fur in LaGrange, Wisconsin, Don Bierman. If you send him your own fur, your own tanned fur, it's only about 60 bucks to get a hat made. And I'm talking a nice, like one of the trapper style hats. You got the ear flaps to keep you warm. And that's a hat made of your own fur that could last 3 generations for 60 bucks. I mean, sign me up. That's can't beat that deal. And they make
Cannot.
beaver mittens and otter stuff, like anything you can think
Anything.
of. Yeah, it's really a time trap fur and utilize it yourself. Make garments. Also, you could just tan them. They make great. Hang them on the wall. I think it looks just as good as a deer head mounted if you have a
Yeah, that's what I do with just hang it.
oxtail. Yeah.
Decor is good.
Or beaver pelts are really great as I know people that'll drape them over their furniture. Every single couch or chair will have a beaver pelt on the top. And it looks nice, but then also if you sit down and get cold, you just snuggle up with that thing and it'll warm you right up. And remember, a beaver pelt weighs about 25 pounds. So basically, it's like a heated blanket. Those are popular now. Apparently, they make you feel safe and stuff. So I think a beaver blanket would be pretty good at that. And then, so not only just utilizing the fur, but a lot of these animals can and are eaten. Beaver, for one, excellent
Love
table
it. Love
fare.
it.
I try to butcher all the beaver that I get. There nothing wrong with it at all. It's a good red meat. They're basically like an aquatic deer cow. So, um, no problems at all. Muskrats are good. Bobcats are surprisingly good. It's a meat like pork, which is really interesting. And raccoons too is another thing that's like pork, bear. It's just a unique eating experience. So getting these and having a couple of these unique critters in your freezer to bust out for that family dinner night, people remember that. That might be the only time they eat raccoon or muskrat in their whole life. So pretty cool and excellent. I mean beaver, yeah, I don't know. Beaver and deer are like, I don't know. It's tough to pick a favorite.
Beaver is so good.
It is a lot of things you can do with it, and
The
they're,
tail, some people will just cook the tail alone.
yeah, that's really fatty.
They're
So
very fatty, just dripping with fat.
Yeah, it's if you like a really rich thing, then beaver tail could be good for you. But the meat very similar to beef, and because they're a water animal, they're fusiform, they're torpedo shaped. They just so happen to fit completely in most commercial smokers. So there's that.
Now,
It's
since we'll
true. They're
probably
cute.
get the
They got
question,
little long legs.
like we always do, have you tried coyote? I personally have not. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think I have. I went to a friend of mine back in college made canine chili, and
Ooh,
so I wasn't clear if it was coyote or fox or what all he ground up in there. It might have been a little of both, but I did try a little bit of that. But in chili, you couldn't,
yeah, yeah,
you know. So I haven't tried it specifically. One thing I will mention is you got to be leery of poisons, which is unfortunate, but so many landowners will sprinkle rodenticides all around, and the problem is those bioaccumulate in animals like coyotes, and so I would be leery. And it could happen with something like bobcats and raccoons too, which is why I definitely only eat them in moderation. But yeah, unfortunately, the biocontamination hazards are a real concern, especially with an animal like coyotes that may be eating all them mice and
yeah,
stuff that are going through the barn. So I haven't, other than that chili, which was indiscernible.
yeah, yeah.
All right, here's all the additional resources we mentioned, so I'll just let you read through those. But yeah, Sleepy Creek Tannery's there. Really good tannery, some of the places where you can actually sell fur. But again, great time to get a tan, get stuff made for yourself, and you're gonna appreciate it way more than that $3 that you would have got from selling it to the buyer.
You bet. All right. Well, just a few things we kind of want to highlight that we have coming down the pipeline. Obviously, spring turkey season's just around the corner, so we're getting prepped for that. But we're also really going to focus a lot more on fur bear hunting and trapping. So we've got quite a full slate. Not all the dates are released yet. We'll have more dates to announce probably next week or the following week. But we do have an event scheduled on February 4th. That's at Des Plaines State Fish and Wildlife Area, so just a little bit south of Chicago. That one is not open for registration yet. It will probably be open tomorrow once we kind of solidify the timing of that. But that's going to be a really fun workshop where we're going to go and take the next step of this conversation, this webinar we just had, and go apply it out in the field. And so we're going to bring all these hands-on activities, that we can actually teach and do some mock setups where we're going to go set up, do some calling, and kind of see if we're getting any response. So it'll be a really fun event. So check that out if you're interested. Again, that should be posted on our website tomorrow, so you should be able to register for that pretty quickly. We also do want to give a plug for our podcast. It's called Hunting Illinois. You can find it on YouTube or on all of the big podcast services. We've had a couple pretty good guests recently. We've been really focused on falconry. So we talked to some folks from the Great Lakes Falconers Association. For kind of part two. Part one of this series, we actually talked to Curtis's brother-in-law, Nick, who's out in Nebraska. Is that right?
Yep.
Nebraska, and he's a master falconer out there. So if you're interested in falconry or just wanting to keep up with the program or just want to continue learning about hunting, that's what we really want this podcast to be, is just an extension of kind of our program, but also do it in kind of a fun and interactive way. So we always like people to write in, share your stories with us. So check that out and be on the lookout for a bunch of trapping related stuff coming down the pipeline pretty soon. So if you're interested in that, we've got a full slate coming very soon. But with that, we'll stick around. I know we went over time a little bit, so we'll give it 2 or 3 minutes. If anyone's got any questions, we'll stick around and answer those. If you have a question that comes up later on, feel free to email us, shoot us a message on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, wherever you can find us. We'll be happy to help in any way we can.
Yeah, we should also plug our Facebook page, the Learn to Hunt Connection. So basically, that's a page just for people who have participated in a webinar or in person or something, and that's just basically just what it says, a connection page where you can come in and ask questions. A lot of people even facilitate hunts there. They may come in and say, "Hey, I've got a drawing Banner Marsh duck hunt, got 2 openings. Who wants to come?" Or hook up hunts that way. So definitely, if you're on the Facebook Learn to Hunt Connections page, ask to join. We'll get you in there and use it as a reference whenever you have questions. We want to be your resource, and not just us, but all the other participants who have taken classes before. They get in there and like to answer questions too, and sometimes even friendly debates, whatever it is, as long as you're being nice and not as Hank Shaw says, yucking somebody else's yum, then
Yeah.
we'll let it go.
But yeah, and I mean, at this point, if you were to probably go in there and say, "Hey, I'm looking to coyote hunt. Anybody want to join?" You're probably going to get some responses, and there's probably going to be somebody who wants to tag along. And so it's a good way to meet some people, make some connections, make some relationships, and try to get out with them. I did see we have one question. Oh, more of a comment. Thanks for the lesson. See you February 4th. Hopefully, I live 5 miles down the road. Oh, perfect.
Oh, nice.
Look forward to seeing you there. That should be we're really excited about that one. The timing works out well. Hopefully the weather holds, but if not, we do have an indoor facility that we can at least kind of retreat to and stay warm inside if it's utterly cold. But we're having about as mild of a winter as I can remember.
Yeah, I don't even remember what cold is.
Yeah.
Like 50 degrees. It was a little chilly today, I guess, with the
It was. I wish we would have gone hunting today instead of the other day when we went, because we both
yeah,
dressed up in like full gear, ready to go. And
it was
by the
so
end of it, I was covered. My coat probably weighed 20 pounds from the sweat.
yeah, I know. I thought I had a hole in my waders. Then I remembered I wasn't wearing waders.
All right. Well, on that note, looks like we don't have any more questions. So again, if you have a question that comes to your mind in a little bit, feel free to find us and we'll be happy to talk you through it. But thanks for joining us tonight. I hope to see you at future events and hope to see you out in the field.
Thanks, everybody. See you in
All
the
right.
next
Have a good night.